and of course, some music. So let's get right into it. Well, first I have to give due where due is due, and that is to the Philadelphia Eagles. They came through and became a member of the Super Bowl club. Now every team in the NFC East is a champion. So, Philadelphia Eagles, welcome to the club. So I know a lot of my listeners out there, they saying, D. Lloyd talking about Philadelphia Eagles? Yeah, you know what? You got to give due where due is due. They beat the best to be the best. So right now, enjoy it, because I tell you, that new season will be right here, right around the corner, and then we'll see what happens. But folks, tonight we got a very nice show for you. And as you know, it is the beginning of Black History Month. And we have a couple of things for you on the show that's really good for Black History Month. You know, we have a couple of book reviews that we're going to talk about tonight. I'm not going to tell you what they are, but they're very well-known books, and books that have some bearing on today's world. But first, we're going to get into a little bit of the political side that you know I always have to do. And that's about confidence in the institutions within the United States. Now, as you know, since Mr. Trump is now president, all of these things about the confidence in the institutions have now come to light. You know, there have been many, many groups that have had problems with many of the institutions that are being brought out now. Like, for example, the FBI. Now, you know, the FBI has the special counsel, which is Mueller, and he's investigating Russia probe and the election. But let's go back a little bit. You know, in the black community, we've had a problem with the FBI for a long time, and the Justice Department. You know, if you go back to J. Edgar Hoover and his files on Martin Luther King and many other black leaders, you know, it was okay when he was investigating or getting dossiers or files on those folks. Why? Because it was against the black community. But nobody had anything to say. I wonder why. You know, it's just now that it's coming along with Trump and the Republicans, they're trying to muddy up the waters so much that it makes it seem like the FBI is not doing a good job. We need the FBI. We need the CIA. We need the police. We need the military. We need all of these things to make us feel comfortable here in the United States. So I'm not against them. I'm just saying that some of their methods and some of their reasons are now being questioned. I wonder why. Well, okay, the father of Black History Month, Dr. Carter G. Woodson. That's the gentleman who started it all. He was born in 1875 near New Canton, Virginia. He was the son of former slaves. In 1907, he obtained his BA degree from the University of Chicago. That's big time back then. And in 1912, he received his PhD from Harvard University, which was really big because he was the second black to earn a PhD from Harvard University. So W.E.B. Du Bois was the first. Now, in 1915, he established the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, and a year later, the Journal of Negro History in 1926. Woodson then launched the annual February observance of Negro History Week. That's right, folks. It was just a week for those younger listeners, which later became Black History Month in 1976. It is said that he chose February for the observance because February 12th was Abraham Lincoln's birthday, who set forth the Emancipation Proclamation, and February 14th was the accepted birthday of Frederick Douglass, the great orator. We all know who he was. And it's so funny that Donald Trump thought he was still alive. But we'll give him a pass because we know he's not the sharpest pencil in the box. So Dr. Woodson went on, and he was the founder of Associated Publishers, the founder and editor of the Negro History Bulletin, and was the author of over 30 books. His best-known publication is The Miseducation of the Negro, and was published in 1933. But much of its insight is still relevant today. And he had passed away in 1950. So that's a little background on that Black History Week, which was Negro History Week when it first started, and evolved into Black History Month. But now I'm going to bring forth my guest, my buddy, my friend, Mike Clark. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing fine, Darryl. How you doing? Thank you for having me this evening.
Hey, my pleasure, my pleasure. So, as I was telling the guests on the build-up, you know, when we talk about almost anything. And you said that you wanted to speak on a book tonight. So, what's the name of that book?
Interesting you should bring that up. This book was published in 2010 by Michelle Alexander. And the title of the book is The New Jim Crow.
Ah.
I don't think I have to explain Jim Crow to the listening audience tonight. Do you?
Well, if you could do it quickly, because the thing about Jim Crow is people maybe have heard about it, but don't really understand what it was like, especially before 1964 and 65.
Okay, good place to start. Jim Crow, if I'm not mistaken, historically refers to this fictional character who represented at the time black folk and black culture in the South from the Southern white point of view. I hasten to add that I don't think many blacks internalized that subordinate status in their own minds. Let's hope they didn't, because it wasn't ever deserved. But before we begin, I'd like to try a brief stab at levity. There's a rumor going around, on the radio as a matter of fact, that the president is wondering why Frederick Douglass is not retweeting. I don't have an answer for that, but
there is none.
You think about it for a minute.
There is no answer, and I actually gave you the answer earlier.
Right, he's not the sharpest pencil in the pack, so we'll let it go at that, because we're not going down that wormhole with that man tonight. We have too much productive talk to consider before
Definitely.
something like that.
Definitely.
Jim Crow, after the Civil War, when this so-called emancipation took effect, let's face it, listening audience, it really didn't take much effect in the aftermath of the Civil War. In fact, if you look at history in the South, there is a period which the defeated Confederate and like-minded whites in the South understood that they weren't going to tolerate a situation where blacks were considered to have equal status with whites. So, after the North withdrew its troops in the mid-1870s, Democratic leaders and the former Confederate leaders devised this system and enacted it legally to basically reduce the rights of blacks in the South to a status somewhat similar to slavery minus the chains. Everything else, you can delve into the history for yourself, but everything else was reduced to the point where whites reassumed dominance in the political and especially in the legal realm. These codes were essentially written into law so that it gave the force of law to subordinate blacks relative to the whites. Some of you might notice that nonviolence was effective, although people in the South did not hesitate to resort to violence.
Oh, they believed in violence.
Yes. Did you know
Control.
that in, I think it was 1903, I could be a bit sketchy on the dates, but an officially elected black government in Wilmington, North Carolina was overthrown by violent means.
And they weren't the only one.
They weren't the only ones. The Wilmington fiasco is something that's been written in history. I hesitate to say that it didn't happen anywhere else, because we both know it did. And there's always that underlying sense of violence. I could also mention Tulsa, Oklahoma, which people in the audience are well aware of. And which brings me up to another.
That's Black Wall Street, by the way, folks.
Yeah, that's right. The Greenwood section of Tulsa. I mean, it was, in fact, if I might interject, and excuse me for jumping around, but some of the underlying reasons for this antipathy toward blacks who made it economically was this idea that they did not deserve it, and white people could not tolerate the idea that they had less than blacks did.
Now, can I interject?
Yes, you may.
That statement that you made, it's even relevant and prevalent today with athletes. Because if you remember, many of these owners and the president feel as though these athletes aren't really appreciative of what they have or what they've been allowed to do. So it's the same mentality, just updated.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. I guess it might be regarded as this hokey idea of the paternal aspect of slavery days, where white people knew what was good for blacks, and blacks had no choice but to go along with the routine whenever necessary. And you can understand the idea of, well, if we have to do this to survive, this is what we're going to have to go through. We don't buy into it, we don't believe it, we have our own feelings about the matter, but this is the way it is. After all, we all know, regardless of the period in American history, it's tough to argue with people who are solely given the capability of force, the threat of force, and coercion.
And not to mention can get away with it.
And can get away with it because it's legally enshrined, which brings me back to the idea of Jim Crow laws, where you had facilities that were for whites only, and then there were facilities for, well, as they called them at the time, the coloreds in the South.
And you know something, I hate to keep interrupting you,
No, please do.
but I was talking to another colleague of mine who taught in Wilmington, Delaware. He no longer teaches, but he said while he was teaching some facts about what we're talking about, that the black kids in his classes actually did not believe this stuff happened.
And that might be the best example of indoctrination, or sowing seeds of discord through misinformation and disinformation that basically created, if not confusion, doubt in people's minds. Need I remind the audience that, to me, we are experiencing the same thing here in the United States. We have many
Today.
examples.
Because today, you mean?
Yeah, today,
Yeah.
in 2018, all you need to do is turn on certain cable news programs on television, tune into certain...
Fox, I'm going to say it, Fox.
Yeah, okay. We all know what that means, too. That, in effect, Fox is, in effect, the propaganda arm of the Trump administration. I challenge anyone to sit and listen to 5 minutes of what is regarded, what is being sold to the audience as news.
I try because I want to hear what the other side is, and I try to listen for a half hour, and I just can't, because it's ridiculous. I don't understand. You know, whoever's doing their writing is a good fictional, writer, because I can't believe some of the stuff they come up with.
Well, they do seem to be a bit outlandish, but when you consider this this concept we have now of an echo chamber.
Mm.
These programs that Fox puts out are intended for a specific audience. And I think, Darrell, that's the reason why people like you and I cannot sit for me, I can't sit for more than 5 minutes before I say, this is too much, this is all gibberish to me, and I wish I could go back in time to the campaign of 2016 where my wife and I used to sit and explode with laughter whenever we heard candidate Trump stump on the campaign trail. In retrospect, the guy was capable of being hilarious, but he's not funny anymore since he's the president of the United States. And you see these thoughts being transformed into action. Actions which to me kind of resemble what Jim Crow must have been like before the Civil Rights era.
Well, you know he wants America to be great again, and that means go back to the 1950s.
And that's scary for a huge part of the population. Hence this drive that seems to make Fox the official mouthpiece of the Trump administration.
Well, I don't know about that. You say that they are the mouthpiece of Trump. Actually, Fox and Friends gives Trump his talking points. That morning show, whatever they say in the morning and how they feel, that's what Trump puts. So who's the mouthpiece for who?
Darrell, you've just succeeded in scaring me a whole lot. I am well aware that this indeed is the reality, but my fear comes more from a place of knowing that these people, Fox and Friends and others, were waiting for someone like Donald Trump.
They created him.
To come along, not just to create him because Trump already existed, they have legitimized in about 35% of the population this man's viewpoint.
That's right.
That's basically 1 out of 3 Americans is not for equal rights.
But would you say that was an undertone all the time, and now that Trump is president and does it all the time, now it's acceptable to be in the mainstream?
Agreed. My wife and I go around with this a lot, and I argue that the era of liberalism that began with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, whether or not you like his policies, some of which are very objectionable, liberalism is over. And I think it's not dead, but since the apex of this liberalism, which I think was one of the miracles of the 21st century, when we elected a black man to the presidency of the United States, what we're seeing now is a counter-reaction to all that. Donald Trump is a representation of an attempt to reject all the gains, whether or not you think they are gains, that have been achieved during the era of liberalism.
No matter what it is, Donald Trump is trying to reverse anything Obama put into effect. Even good things. He don't care. If Obama did it, he doesn't like it, he's going to try to change it.
With or without the help of Congress.
That's it.
Donald Trump is effectively ruled from the White House by a series of executive orders. Look at all the legislation that he has passed in the last year. Oh, wait a minute. After taxes, I'm coming up with a blank. Everything else that has been changed or has been attempted to be changed are these executive signing orders. They have the force of law, but you don't see its immediate effects. And as you said a moment ago, Darrell, if you don't pay attention, you will miss what is going on right before your eyes.
Mike, there's an old saying that I always tell people. There are 3 kinds of people in the world. One is the people that sit back and say, or watch what's happening. They watch what's happening. Second type of person is wondering what's happening. And the third, which is the worst of all, says, what happened? And that's what a lot of us are out here. We're like, what happened? How did that happen?
Well, that must mean that someone wasn't paying attention to what was occurring.
Exactly.
Now, I think part of that is attributable to this disinformation and misinformation, and its effects might not be felt today, They might not be felt in a week, but they are on the way, and they have been put into motion. Let's get back to this book. if I may.
Let's do that.
The new Jim Crow is an effort by these reactionaries, and that's why I support by reactionaries such as Richard Nixon, in an attempt to roll back liberalism. They realize that this is and to make something legitimate in law to regain their This new Jim Crow, according to Michelle Alexander, occurs surreptitiously.